We're going to get started here in a minute, just giving people a chance to join. We're going to have an incredible half hour of in-depth Torah analysis. So we're glad you're joining us. I'm just getting this shared on our various social media platforms.
אתה מכיר אישה עולה על האוטובוס בירושלים?
מה?
אישה עולה על אוטובוס בירושלים.
איפה?
בירושלים. והיא אומרת לנהג, האוטו הזה ישיר? אז הוא אומר, גברת, בשבילך האוטו הזה ישיר וגם ירקוד.
Oh, you're good.
I can do this.
We are 30 seconds out. I'm just sharing it in the last two spaces. Good evening, everyone on Zoom, on Facebook Live. Good evening, everyone on YouTube. You know, it's a one-man show, so we're doing all the tech support as well, so it takes an extra minute. Good evening, Baruch. Good to see you. I appreciate everyone accommodating my a later class tonight. I had an event I had to attend for the betterment of the Jewish people. You know, most of you don't know this, but I'm not a night owl, so I generally don't stay up late unless I have to. So let's just say that it was important. So here we are. This is it. Manny Brook, time to come to class. Man? Sounds like a plan. My assistant, and we are good to go. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful week. It looks like we're going to get one of our beautiful evening monstrosity monsoon rainstorms any minute. But we are in the third portion of the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar. And in chapter 8, verse 23, it says as follows. So it's on page 859 in the Life Chumash that we use. It says, God spoke to Moses saying, this is the rule of disqualification for the Levites. He is qualified to serve in the tent of meeting from the age of 25 years and upwards. He is withdrawn from those qualified to work from the age of 50, and he may serve no longer. At this age, he may position himself around the tent of meeting to help his brothers guard the duty, but he may not perform the service. This is the law, how the Levites should carry out their duties. It's 3 short verses at the end of chapter 8 in the book of Numbers, in the book of Bamidbar. And what it says is that the Levites should come in when they're 25 years old, and when they're 50, they don't serve anymore. Now, that sounds fascinating, especially considering, and I want to pull that up, especially considering that a different verse, just want to pull up the other verse. The other verse says, and I'm trying to find it here in front of me, but the other verse says that, we're on page 859, 858, 859. The other verse says that the service of the Levites was from the age of 30 to 50. So one verse says from the age of 25 to 50, and the next verse says from the age of 30 to 50. Now, let's start backwards here for a moment. What happens at 50? Like, is 50 the age of retirement? You get to be a Levite only till the age of 50? What about a Kohen? We talk about the Levites, right? In the family of Levites, it's divided into two. There's the Levites who serve in one function. They carry the various vessels and aspects of the tabernacle. They sing music. They play instruments. They guard the temple. Not physically, not like guarding from threats, but guarding from an honor guard. So they can do it from age either 25 or 30 until 50. We'll talk about the 25 and 30 in a moment. What about a Kohen? Does he have an age limit? So let's start like this. A key difference between a priest and a Levite is that a Kohen, a priest, is disqualified by various physical blemishes on their body. Is that me? Yeah, that. Hold on, yeah. By various blemishes on their body, but they're not disqualified by age. A Kohen can serve in the temple, the tabernacle, for a long time. A Levite is not disqualified by blemishes, but is disqualified from certain services by age. So now we need to tackle this, and by the end of this, we're going to have an incredible, really a heavy-duty learning curve that I think is so vital, because in America, there's always discussion about retirement. There's always discussion when that should be. France is having all these demonstrations for the last, 75 months. By the way, it's a good sign of way too many. There was way too many people who retired because they have so much time to demonstrate. I don't have that. If I had to demonstrate, I'd go for half an hour. That's it. I got to get back to work. How do you go demonstrate for that long? But it's all part of this big discussion about how does life function and what age does that functionality exist. So let's start with the 25. In the tabernacle in the desert, God commanded Moshe to gather the Levites from the age of 25. And Rashi tells us right away, why 25? Because they need 5 years to learn, to train. It's a training period of 5 years to watch as the other Levites do their job and to really perfect it. So for 5 years, they're training. And then for 20 years, from the age of 30 to 50, they are in service. That's Rashi's understanding. Other commentators disagree. Other commentators tell us that that's insane. What if a guy is a quick learner? And what if in 2 years or in 2 months he figured out the whole gig? You're going to make him sit around for 5 years as a trainee when he could be functioning as a full-on Levite? So what they say is no, 5 years is the maximum. So they disagree with Rashi. It's not a finality. It doesn't have to be 5 years. But you need up to 5 years to train, and then by then you better know what you're doing and get to work. But it could be shorter. And then the question becomes, if you start earlier, let's say you start when you're 27, right? Does that mean you finish before 50? You finish at 48? 47? The answer is no. You still work, you still do it until you're 50 years old, right? Or if you start at 30, not at 25, doesn't mean you go till, if a guy that starts at 25 finishes at 50, you might think that if someone starts at 30, they should finish at 55. The answer is no. The Torah makes it clear, unequivocally clear. 25 is training time. If you get it quicker, wonderful, you get to serve longer, but no one goes over the age of 50 in the particular service that becomes prohibited at the age of 50. So let's tackle that now. What changes when you hit 50? You're still a Levite. So what? And speak up, because people need to hear you.
If you're 45, by the time you're done training, average training the 5
What do you mean 45? You start at 25. 25 years old, not years. At the age of 25, you go to training, maximum is 5 years, and then you start serving from 30 to 50. Now you're 50 years old, and certain services in the tabernacle are not for you anymore. So what happens then? So Rashi tells us, Rashi says, and here's an incredible Rashi, and it's one of those Rashis that you study all the time, but you don't necessarily realize how incredible it is until you see Chassidus and the Rebbe's approach, and you go, wow, this 1.5 lines of Rashi is life-altering. Careful with the wire. So Rashi says, and I quote, "V'lo ya'avod od," you are not to work anymore. Avodas masa bekosef, that the strenuous job of schlepping items on your shoulders, that ends at the age of 50. Avol choizeru, but at the age of 50, you go back to doing what? To doing some of the work that you did between the age of 25 and 30, when you were training You didn't get to schlep things because it wasn't appropriate yet. You weren't trained enough. We're not going to give you the opportunity to schlep one of the holy vessels if you're not fully on board yet. So when you're training, you're watching, and what you get to do is you get to close the gates at night, or in the case of the tabernacle, the curtains, and you get to sing, right? They would be the singers, and the Leviim were the musicians and the singers. So you got to sing. The litoin agolos, you got to load, not to carry, but to help load the wagons of tabernacle items. Then Rashi concludes, it says in the verse, they will serve their brothers. What does it mean they'll serve their brothers at the age of 50? Im achui kitarguma, like the Targum Uncle says, like the Aramaic translation, they will serve with their brothers. So let's tackle this Rashi a little bit. You come at the age of 25 as a Levite, as a descendant of the Levite family, either from the family of Kahas, or the family of Gershon, or the family of Merari. You show up at the tabernacle and you're coming to serve. From the age of 25 until maximum the age of 30, you are training. What are you doing while you're training? You're singing. You're helping load the wagons of the items that went on the wagons. You were the honor guards. You closed the gates, the curtains, whatever. You stood outside the perimeter and sort of gave an honor guard to the tabernacle. And then either at the age of 30 or prior, you figured it out. The training worked. You know what you're doing. You get to work. Now, what does that work include? It depends which family you're part of, but it includes singing. It includes playing instruments, which is not mentioned in Rashi. It's something you do after the age of 50. It just says singing. It doesn't say instruments. And you schlep, and you honor guard. You do everything until the age of 50. And 50, you go back to doing what you did before you turned 30, which is singing, putting things on wagons, and being an honor guard. It's a fascinating thing. Now, there's commentators that talk about this, and I have to tell you, I think it was it late last night, or maybe it was 4:30, 5 o'clock this morning, when I was reading up in this one book. It says that one of the Bali Atosis, one of the great French Toseftas, the commentators on the Talmud, writes something fascinating. And it said, what does it say? Why from 50 and older did they not... There's an opinion that says that they didn't sing anymore. Rashi says they did sing after the age of 50. But there's an opinion that says after 50, no more singing. So this is the Toseftas, who generally disagree with Rashi. They say, you know why? From 50 and up, they stop singing? Because by the time you turn 50, your saliva in your mouth is not functioning the way it should, the way it used to. And there's astrological issues that go on for a person that are connected to a person with their astrology at the age of 50, and their voice is not as crystal, delicious, clear, and sweet as it once was. It actually becomes very deep and not as delicious to listen to. And therefore, when you're 50, you're gone. You're out of the tabernacle. Now, we have a problem with that opinion, which is probably why Rashi did not accept the opinion. What's our problem with that opinion? There's an interesting law in Jewish law in Halacha. What does it say in Halacha? In the code of Jewish law, it says on a day of a fast, on a fast day, which is a day of repentance, a day of prayer, we have all this liturgical prayers that we do in order to evoke repentance and return to God and tshuva, and we're fasting. It says over there in the Halacha, Umihu aroi, who is a worthy person to be the cantor, to be the chazan in the shul? A person that's ragil b'tfilah, so he's a common person that prays often, so he knows how to read proper Hebrew, and he knows how to read the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the whole Tanakh, not just the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, but the books of the prophets and the books of the writings. Umetupol ve'enloi, he raised children, but the kids have already left the nest, they're not home anymore, and he knows how to work with his hands. And there's no criminals and sinners in his close proximity in his family and the close relatives. It's quite a list of criteria. And then it says you should have a home that's empty of sin. You should have no bad name in the streets. People don't think negatively about you. You should be a humble and loved person by the community. And then the last thing it says, you should have a sweet voice. And if you're an elderly person with all these great attributes, that would be the best, which means you could be an elderly person over 50 and still have a sweet voice. So then the Tosefta's opinion that at the age of 50, they had to stop singing because they had bad voices doesn't make sense. And maybe that's why Rashi did not accept that opinion. And Rashi was very much of the opinion that your voice not only could be beautiful when you turn 50, but perhaps even more beautiful than before you were 50. But the bottom line is, when you turn 50, you're going back to doing the service in the tabernacle that involves less stress and less physical, intense labor. Now, just so no one comes later and says, Rabbi, you lied to us. You may read in the book of Chronicles, in the book of Divrei Hayamim, in the books of the prophets, it says that King David, when he was building and planning the building of the temple of God in Jerusalem, that he bought from Aravna the Jebusite, he paid cash, and he bought the Temple Mount to build the temple. And when he hired the laborers, the Levites, to come serve in the tabernacle, in the new temple, when they transitioned from the tabernacle to the temple, I don't know how many of you know, so I'm going to say it just in case, that even after the Jews crossed the Jordan River into Israel with Joshua into Jericho, and then they had the tabernacle for probably 450, maybe more years. It was 360 years in Shiloh, and then it was in Nob and Givon, it was in Gilgal, it was in a bunch of places. And it was only in the days of King David when he created the plans and bought the land, and his son Solomon built it and inaugurated. But in the book of Chronicles, in the book of Divrei Hayamim, it says that King David got the Levites starting from the age of 20 until the age of 50 to serve in the temple. Age of 20, not 25. So why did he change it? So I was reading today in the book of Chronicles, I'm like, how do you reconcile this? Is it 20 or is it 30? Is it 20? Right? What you think King David needed them to have 10 years of training now instead of 5? So the Ralbag, Kirsanadite, one of the great commentators, Reb Gershon, Reb Levi ben Gershon, who has an incredible commentator on the Torah, he says, no, not at all. It's not a contradiction. Remember, the temple, unlike the tabernacle, was a stationary place. It was built and that's it. There was no more putting it down, putting it back up, erecting it, dismantling it, erecting it, dismantling it, up and down, up and down. For that, you need a lot of physical labor, and then we have to deal with. You have to be at least 30 years old, or at least over 25 to have the strength and the stamina to schlep beams and move and build and construct. I'm 41, I still don't have it. I don't know when it's going to come, the interest or the stamina to do that kind of stuff. Me and Home Depot are not friends. I'm the prototype of what Jackie Mason spoke about when he spoke about Jewish people in construction. So whatever that stereotype was, he was talking about me. But in the temple, where it just stood in one place for 410 years, the temple that Solomon built, that David orchestrated, stood in Jerusalem for 410 years. And the one that the Jews built, Ezra and Nehemiah and Nehemiah built when they came back from the Babylonian exile, that stood for 420 years. So we're talking about 830 years of history that the temple stood on the Temple Mount. I mean, don't tell that to the UN because they might have to dismantle all the Baba mice, as they say about the Temple Mount every day, but for 830 years. So when King David's building the temple and he's hiring the Levites, he goes, hold on, we don't need guys schlepping. The job of the Levites now is to be an honor guard, to sing, to play instruments. For that, I don't need them to be 25. I don't need them to be 30. They can start at 20. And the Talmud, 20 is an age, right? 13 is when you become a bar mitzvah, but 20 is where you become really responsible for your actions to the point of being punished for it, with malchus, with lashes and other stuff. So they're 20, they're responsible enough, right? How do they say in America? If they're responsible enough to go to war, why can't they buy alcohol? Why can't they smoke? Why can't they? If they're responsible enough to get lashes for their sins, they should be responsible enough to be able to come work as Levites in the temple, because the schlepping and the stamina that's needed isn't needed anymore. But in the days of the tabernacle, so in the 40 years in the desert plus the 400 plus years in Israel that they had the tabernacle, the Levites' job from 25 to 30 was training, 30 to 50 was doing all the harsh labor, and then 50, it's time for slight retirement or semi-retirement. You go back to singing, you go back to helping load things onto the wagons, and you go back to being an honor guard. Everything sounds wonderful as of now. Then along comes my dear Rebbe, who makes you take, he always does this. He forces us. I think this is a talk from the late 70s. I was reading it last night. I don't remember the year. I think it was the late 70s, maybe 79. Don't hold me accountable. I think it was 79. He says, I was reading Rashi, this Rashi that says that they're not going to do the schlepping anymore, but they'll go back to being the honor guard and to sing and to load the wagons, and they will serve their brothers. And according to the Onkelos, the Aramaic, it's with their brothers. And I didn't understand, says the Rebbe, I don't understand what the connection is here. Right? Rashi brings both of these ideas together. Why are they connected? They're not going to work and schlep anymore. They're going to serve their brothers. And Rashi says, oh, it means, according to the Onkelos, with their brothers. Okay, but why is that in the same Rashi? Got to listen to this. It sounds simple, but it's profound, and what it does to our psyche about seeing our Yiddishkeit. So the Rebbe says, when someone reads the words, the Sheris es Echav, they will serve their brothers, you're going to have, they're immediately, if they're studious, if they study the Torah, they're going to jump up with a question. Right? It says, right, Rashi said that they go back to singing and to being an honor guard. Right? And that they don't play instruments, not the cymbals and not the harp. They're not doing the instruments. They're singing. At 50, they go back to singing, but not with the instruments, because instruments evidently take more energy. Singing takes less. I'm not really an instrument, guys. I don't know, but I watched my daughter with her instruments. It looks pretty intense, right? But that makes no sense. You're saying that these Levites at the age of 50 are not capable of blowing a trumpet, but the same Rashi says that they would help schlep the stuff onto the wagons, the beams and the curtains and the sockets and all these heavy stuff they're putting on the wagon. Suddenly they have strength and stamina at 50 to go back to schlepping things and putting it on the wagon, but they don't have strength to use the instrument. So Rashi understood that we're going to read this verse and we're going to say, hold on, you just told me they can't work anymore, but now you're telling me that they could work. And what could they do? They could sing and they could schlep beams onto wagons, but they can't play instruments. Something about that doesn't compute. And to answer that internal dilemma, Rashi brings us the Aramaic translation that means im achui, with his brothers. And that is, when you play an instrument, you got to do it yourself. Right? Normal instruments, one person is playing the instrument, which means all the energy that this particular Levi has to do, he has to do himself. And when he turns 50, he doesn't have the stamina and the koyach to run that kind of op all by themselves. But loading wagons and closing doors and being an honor guard, you don't have to do it alone. You can have 2 Levites, you can have 7 Levites. We're going to take this beam, we're going to put it together onto it's not an instrument. So instruments at the age of 50, you're gone. Schlepping your own stuff, if you're from the family of Kahas, and schlepping it on your shoulders, that's out. Anything that takes an incredible level of intensity and work, 50 is done. And it's almost like the Torah is giving the Levites an opportunity not to get sick of the job, not to get burnt out. You're going to tell a guy he's 55 now, he's still schlepping, or he's still standing with his trombone, trying to make music, right? He's a Jew. He probably has a cardiac issue, a little arthritis, a little this, a little that. Now you want him to stand there with a trombone? So the Torah says, no, don't. Trombone you shouldn't do. But singing is a choir. The Levites were a choir. You weren't a solo. You were singing with other people, so it doesn't take all your energy. Being an honor guard, you're doing it with other people. Putting beams onto a wagon, it's not on your shoulder. You're helping place things on wagons with as many people as you need to make it happen. It shouldn't be too stressful on you. So Rashi is telling us it is interconnected. You shouldn't be, because the Levites shouldn't be doing any crazy work after the age of 50. What about putting the stuff on the wagon? They're doing it with others. Because by the time you hit 50, you realize an incredible thing. That most young people are too arrogant and self-centered that they don't realize, and that is, you can get a lot further by including others and helping you and doing it as a team. Teamwork makes things a lot easier, makes things a lot more successful, and takes off a lot of the burden from yourself. And at 50, you're finally old enough to realize that and celebrate that. And the Torah says, here, this is how you do it. Helping others, doing it as a team, fantastic. Alone? Not for you anymore. The things you do alone should be easier stuff. Which I find fascinating, because if you look, this time of year we study Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot. And in Pirkei Avot, at the end of chapter 5, it says, at 5 years old is when you start learning Torah. At 10 years old is when you start learning Talmud. 13 years old is when you're obligated to mitzvahs. 18 years old when you should get married. It gives you the whole list of what does it say about 50? 50 is the age of good counsel. You can give good advice. You hinted to it before. What do you do at 50? So you sing, you this, you that. But you know what it says in Ethics of Our Fathers? At 50, you finally reached a point in your life, and before that, you shouldn't be involved in that, of giving good, solid guidance and counsel based on your life's experience. So you know what the Levites really needed from their elderly Levites, from the ones who turned 50? They needed them to be their counselors. They needed them to be their advisors. They needed them to help them understand how to be a better Levite in service of God. And actually, one of the things it says in the commentaries on Ethics of Our Fathers is that at 50, and we learn this from here, that the Levites had the opportunity now to be of the greatest service. Because there's no greater service for young people in service of God, to have older people who have gone through the service, who've experienced that, and are now able to come back and from their experience and from their enlightened state, share with the younger crowd how it should be done properly. If someone were to look at society and say, what's our biggest challenge? And I guess there's many ways to answer that, but there's a lot of societal havoc. And one of the biggest issues is that young people have been trained to disrespect older people. They think all the people that are older than them are clueless, and they're the brilliant, smartest people that ever lived. I was trained the opposite. I was trained by my parents, my grandparents, by people in the shul here in the community, that when you get to spend time, and from experience, because as a rabbi, I do spend time with people that are older, the life wisdom that you hear from people that have been through so much, whether it was good stuff or not, the wisdom that they've learned along the way is incredible. And I don't care if they're a 70-year-old person in a jail cell, or a 70-year-old vet, or a 70-year-old business person that retired, or a nurse, or whatever. The amount of wisdom they can share that sheds so much light on the way we see the world and how we could see the world better and learn is unbeatable. So whether it was Eddie that used to come around to shul, remember Eddie that Edith used to bring? Whether it was Georgette, whether it was Barbara, there was all these people. Even now, he's not that old, but Howard, when he sits here at the Shabbos table with me, he talks about growing up in the 50s and the 40s, whenever. It's incredible. For me, I love that. That's really what the Torah is telling us here. From 30 to 50, put in all your koyach, all your effort, all your energy to serve God in the most strenuous way. But at 50, you don't retire, you shift gears. You do some of the stuff that are out of respect, out of honor, and you still get to bring your talents of singing and schlepping with others to the table. But what you bring more than anything else at 50, starting at 50, is you bring your wisdom, your eitzah, that it says in Pirkei Avot, your life's wisdom, your experience to be advice, to give advice and give counsel. And then younger people understand, in this particular case of the Levites, they understand what the service of God is meant to look like. And so sometimes people look at numbers in the Torah, 30 to 50. I mean, what's that? Why not 52? So that why not 52? That's a question you could ask God when you get to heaven. I'm not going to try to answer why not 52, but generally, right? Not the specifics, but the general, why there's 20 years of harsh service, or not harsh, but strenuous service. And then you shift into a different gears because that's what the younger generation needs. Older people who care about them, older people who understand what the service is like, older people who could tell them the pros, the cons, the easy, the hard. The Kohanim, the priests, didn't have that. I don't know if it's because the priests, their job was, the high priest barely survived on Yom Kippur. Most of them didn't come out of the Holy of Holies alive. But the regular priests, I can't pin down exactly why they didn't have that gift. Maybe they just needed more people in service, and the option for retirement at 50, the Kohanim had a much harder job. People would bring offerings. It was a much busier job, right? You weren't just standing there and singing and being an honor guard. It was a big operation. So maybe they, excuse me, maybe they just needed them more. But for the Levites, when I study that verse and I go, wow, yeah, they get to serve with their brothers and they get to do things that are, when you do it as a team, it's easier. But the biggest thing is that they teach us by example, A, that teamwork is incredible because now they're forced at 50 to work with others. And B, they get to be of sage counsel to the younger ones. And I can tell you from my role as a rabbi, as a shliach, as much as I've learned from guys my age, and as much as I learn every day from my students, from my congregants who teach me so much on so many different levels, and as much as Chavi teaches me and my kids teach me, there's something to be said about the elder statesman of Chabad, Rabbi Krinsky, the Rebbe's personal secretary, who I'll call whenever I have a deep, not a theological question necessarily, but where I need real sage guidance of like, what would the Rebbe do in this case? Who am I going to go to? Some young schnook who's my age? I want to go to someone that was around for 80 years working with the Rebbe, or 70 years. Or I go to a senior shliach, Rabbi Levitin in Seattle. He's been in Seattle since the 70s. Or, Rabbi Lazarov in Texas has been there since the 70s. Rabbi Shmotkin in Wisconsin has been there since the 60s. Rabbi Feller in Minnesota. These are guys that have been on the front, they've been on the front lines. In the Jewish Bakhmut, they were in the front lines of the Jewish war against assimilation and against the secularism. And there's no one that can give you, just from their own life experience, the best advice. So if you get a little older and you turn 50 and you feel like, oh, I'm getting old, don't. You reached your prime. You're going to show the world how to work with others, how getting along is more important than your self-centered egocentricity. And you're going to teach the younger generation, if you're smart, you're going to be that pillar for every young person that you ever encounter, to be their pillar of wisdom, their sage, wise counsel that can truly transform their lives individually and collectively. When you change enough young lives to stop being freeloaders and to stop being loud, screaming demonstrators all day, and to stop thinking they're smart in the whole world, just to be good, pious, ethical, honest, moral people that are open to being a true source of change, bringing holiness and godliness into a fractured world. You can be the inspiration to those young people and transform their lives and the world around them. But you have to be willing to take on the role when you hit that age of being able to be of sage wisdom. And if we all do, we'll merit a world of peace and prosperity, a world of tranquility, which will ultimately usher in with the time of Mashiach. May it be speeding in our days. Amen. Have a wonderful week. If you're in town, we'd love to see you Shabbos. And God willing, we'll see you back next Wednesday. Although I will say that next Wednesday, there is a possibility that class will be at my house, not at the shul, due to me maybe being solo. But either way, God willing, we'll have class. Sei gesund. Have a rocking time. Don't sit around and waste your life. Turn off your Twitter. Turn off your TV. Turn off your internet and go learn a sefer. Take out a sefer and learn, and you'll find out the beauty of the Levites. And You live happily ever after. Sei gesund, and we'll see you back here soon.